All right, y'all passed your authorization. Let's go on to last but not least, continuous monitoring. All right, so there's several steps that we go through in continuous monitoring. Looks like my slide's breaking up there. But we analyze impact of the IS and environment changes. So first of all, your system, your environment, your data, your owners, your components, everything is always changing. That's why the old 3-year fire and forget really doesn't work for ANA. You can't check the status, the security status once a year or once every 3 years and expect to know what is actually going on with the security of that system. Because we know you run a Nessus scan, and then a bunch of new vulnerabilities are published on the exact same operating system you've been working for a long time. You didn't know those existed. You update your policy, and all of a sudden you have 50 new findings, and they're all critical. That is a normal thing that happens. That's why we're doing continuous monitoring, because it always changes. You got to conduct ongoing security control assessments. Before, we just had one big one. And we're still going to have that one big one, the authorization test with the SAR that goes to the AO. But you're going to have lots of SARs now. Because every time there is a security impact to, sorry, I should clarify, if there's a security or privacy impact to the information system, you are required to conduct an SIA, Security Impact Analysis. You are required to validate what controls were affected by the changes. Did the threat change? Did the location change? Did the mission change? Did you, all of a sudden, and this happens in a lot of federal agencies, legal requirements changed. They built a system, it was being piloted, and all of a sudden it was a low system, and now it was a critical legal system, like a case file or a safety system for the organization, and the categorization from a baseline was upgraded. If your categorization changes, you have to go through the reauthorization process, right? So, ongoing remediation. You're always going to be updating your plan of action milestone, and then updating your system security plan. And when you're doing these tests, you're going to put instances of test results, I call them small SARs, for all your SIAs. You're going to perform key updates to all the documents, talked about that. Report security status. So you are going to have, now that you're using Archer and these different tools, you have a plethora of different technologies and SCAP capabilities that are going to give the AO an idea of both the SANA, or the ANA process, and the other security-related events that are going on within that system boundary. And those are fed up into a dashboard, supposedly in real time, and then they should be able to make risk determinations on an almost real-time basis. It goes from green to red, and those things are not being fixed. We'll perform ongoing risk and determination acceptance. So we're actually going to go through, and the threat's going to change. You built a system that used to be a normal logistics system. This happens in DoD all the time. We have a logistics system, no big deal. We go to war. All of a sudden, that rail, logistics, that supply chain, the criticality has changed very significantly. I was doing corn, and now I'm doing nukes, right? So a little bit different in hopefully it's not the same trucks, and if it is, don't eat the corn after the nukes are in it, right? And then last but not least is the IS removal and decommissioning. You now have a registration number for your FISMA system, right? That system doesn't go off the OMB's, DHS's, and the IG's satellite until you've completed all the requirements from the decommissioning, and that's a deregistered number. But you have to have all the artifacts that you went through and did the media protection, that you have kept the data that was required on the system in accordance with the NARA requirements, so all the data retention requirements, and any sensitive information was logged in accordance to the NASA requirements. Yes, David?
So what I was thinking was one difference between the two would be who does it. The SAR with the capital S would be the done by the SCA, and the SAR with the lowercase s is just done by operations or
It depends on the. So the question was, there's two different SARs I talked about. There's the one with they're both capital SARs, but you're going to be conducting something called an SIA, Security Impact Analysis. That Security Impact Analysis, you're going to add an appendice to your SAR based on the date, based on the assessment that you conducted, what controls were affected, and how they were tested. In some cases, the answer is yes. If you're a small organization, the answer is it's up. As long as someone's independent reviewing the results, you're fine. But many times, the answer is yes. That security impact analysis is conducted by an independent group. Where it's conducted, though, usually is I don't know that you have this. You should have this, but you have a change control board, right? And on the change control board, one of the controls requires that there be someone that understands security, that has the overriding power on the change control board to ensure that this security impact analysis is actually conducted. And they will most likely have someone or a team that will conduct the security impact analysis. That may or may not be the same team that does the independent assessments for the SANA. It just depends on the organization. I can't answer that for your specific program here. I've seen it many different ways, where it is a hybrid between the security teams that actually create the packages in the smaller programs, and in large organizations, I've seen it be the independent assessment authority conducting those SIAs. They put it in their queue, and it doesn't go to the gate for release until they've conducted their impact analysis. So it depends on how you put together the change control board. I have a question? Oh, sure. So the question was whether there had to be an independent organization that conducted the SIA. Because the SAR, at least the Security Assessment Report as it relates to the ANA, is conducted by an independent organization. And what I said is it could be independent, but someone has to be reviewing the results that's independent for small organizations. NASA is not really considered a small organization, but you might be Kennedy Space Center, and you might have a smaller team, so you wouldn't have to have that independence. You still got to have an independent government person reviewing it to make sure that you followed the proper process structure, you tested the impacts of the controls, and you updated the SAR, the POAM, and the SSP based on the findings. All right, so we develop a strategy. This is the requirement for the primary responsibility is the information system owner or the common control provider. Really, it's the same thing. If you're a common control provider, you're an owner of a control or multiple controls that you have to make sure is tested on an ongoing basis, it's validated, you update the controls, the requirements of inheriting that control, etc. We have supporting roles, risk executive, AO, CIO, SIO, CISO, information steward, and the information system security manager. So continuous monitoring security controls allows organizations to maintain authorization of the IS over time in a dynamic environment. Like I told you, we're no longer just doing a one-shot, one-kill, fire and forget. Every 3 years, we prep because we're about to get tested, and then we take off 2.5 years because we don't have to deal with that again. We're doing it on an ongoing basis. To select the security controls that we monitor and determine the frequency of monitoring. So at some point, this may not be true at this point, but NASA will publish volatile controls, right? And they'll say, these are the most volatile controls that we have within NASA based on our mission space. Then you, as the system owner, when you're putting your plan together, you can still amplify those and say, actually for us, this system, the most volatile control is the following, and instead of just doing the check every 30 days, I'm going to check daily. It is done in collaboration with the AO, the CIO, or the designated AO, and of course the risk executive function. So you can't just amplify or even negate one of the volatile controls. You're supposed to do it every 30 days, and you say, I'm going to do it once every 90 because that's a pain. Just because it's a pain, that's not the answer. You have to say, well, for us, it's a standalone stovepipe system. It's not connected to any of our nets. We have to send a physical person over there, and if you want to budget it, that we have milestones of what's going to happen. I'm going to have to hire Emma to go through every single, I'm going to have to give her 16 hours to go out and test it, etc. You can put that in there, but that may not ever be funded, if you will. So that's where the risk executive function comes in. We have other priorities. That's not a high priority system, or is high priority. Make that happen. You have to update security controls. That's pretty straightforward. We're going to be testing on an ongoing basis. When the independent assessment group came in, they said AC2 was in place, working as intended. They have evidence validating that. And then a security scan came up, or an IG or DHS came in and said, no, that's not true anymore. A new CVE was published. Your identity management system doesn't meet these requirements. There's a new POAM. So what are some examples of security relevant events? Significant weakness identified during a vulnerability scan. Remember, before we have this list where it was just during the assessment it's authorized. Well, now we're doing continuous monitoring. So we're looking at the static and dynamic code of the application and stack. We're doing authenticated vulnerability scans across all the assets. We're looking at the Web Inspect, App Detective, et cetera, DB Protect, all the way across the baseline, and we're getting new significant weaknesses all the time. Yeah, you probably just don't have significant weakness, right? It just says vulnerability scan. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, and you don't have new data. This was my check. That's why you don't have that. I think I updated them at the when I did the QA on them. So new data type, I put that on there because of, if you look at change at mission priorities that result in change of security category or information system, one of the things that's missing in that piece, I thought, was the data type. Meaning that all of a sudden you had a database and you have 15 tuples and you add 5 more and you change the categorization of the information system. We see this all the time. They keep on adding new data. They add PII or PHI data to a system that had none of that before, and they think that they're running the same type of system, but you're not. Weakness or deficiency discovered in currently deployed security controls after an information system breach. So when you have a breach, that's security and privacy relevant. So you actually have to go and find out, first of all, this is another security impact analysis for the team to do. You look at it and say, okay, we have some controls that were either in place and not working as intended, or they didn't go to the rigor and depth enough to protect this system. So now you're basically doing another security impact analysis and finding out whether you need to make a significant change to the system. If it's a significant breach, and who gets to set that threshold for significant? The AO. Usually it's done by the risk executive function in coordination with the AO, but if it's significant, you have to go through the reauthorization process again. Changes in mission priorities, business objectives resulting in change to the security category of the information system. Like I said, this HP printer was doing ARAP spreadsheets, and now it's printing hashed telemetry authentication for a new satellite. It's different. It's still an HP printer. It's got a different mission now, right? You can't look at the controls when it was at a low and expect it to perform at the high without really validating those controls. And information system changes, adding new hardware, software, firmware, establishing new connections. What happens if we connect to a system that's unauthorized? For a certain time, we're unauthorized, right? All of our interconnections have to be authorized. Now, you can set an ISA up to say, I'm not letting you connect to me until you're authorized or until you get your ATO or you get some temporary authorization by our AO. They make a risk-based decision to do so. But otherwise, if you have a bunch of connections and you're connected to an unauthorized system, you are an unauthorized system. So the question was, what about updating your database version? The thresholds are usually set by the change control board when they do the security impact analysis. Sometimes, like let's say you're going from Oracle 10 to 11. It's not really a significant change. But if you go from 10 to 12 and you implement Oracle Advanced Security, you're also doing a bunch of separate modules that connect into like Salesforce and stuff like that. That's a significant, those thresholds are usually set by the CCB. That's why they want someone with security in there to say, what's the impact? You just went from a database it was in our data center here at Kennedy Space Center and connected it to the cloud. That's, that's not only a new connection, a new database, it's a completely separate type of system. So that's why the change control board is so important, along with that individual or organization of individuals that understand security impact. When such events occur, we reconfirm criticality sensitivity, we assess the current security state of the information system, we plan to initiate any necessary corrective actions, and consider recertifying the information system. It's significant. Like I said, those thresholds, remember, that's why we talked about risk appetite earlier, right? Your authorizing official may have a completely different, just the individual changes or even the situation changes, and the way that they look at risk is different. So what you might have been doing in the past, you might say, well, I was talking about when I sent out in the middle of nowhere. No one had looked at those systems in 15 to 20 years because the risk appetite from the AO that was there before was, we don't even, they're out in the, we don't mess with those people. They're with the internet in here, so we should be good now. Let me see what this says here. No video? Is the video back? No video. Can't see you. You won't want that now, would you? Let me see here. Can you see me now? All right, I'm back. So there's a process for ongoing risk determination acceptance, and this is really important if you're going to go take the CECM, the Certified Expert Continuous Monitoring. You need to know this 6-step process where you plan and change, risk appetite, risk analysis, controls, action. So management information includes incidents or loss events, including, you might hear something called spillage. So this is for the DoD side of things. If they say spillage is an incident where you had data that was maintained in a low category or unclassified environment and it spills, or a high environment spills into a lower environment. That's called spillage. So that's just an acronym for you. But you've got this risk appetite that changes. You're always doing risk analysis now. You have controls to mitigate and remediate all the issues. Let's make sure that everyone's still hearing here. Okay, cool. And then line of management reporting, and then once again, every time a change happens, you're going to be, in order for this to work, there's the two things that we needed, and they're both in the CM controls. Asset management and strict configuration management. You cannot do continuous monitoring without those two. You can have all the really cool stuff in the world. You can have every single phase of CDM and all the tools connected. You can have every single one of your packets being inspected, and still, if you don't have change control, you're going to have issues. You're going to have a very difficult time with this continuum process. It says, by the way, classified to unclassified spillage IR is totally different from your usual IR. Good point. Well, anything with NSI, so National Security Information, is they have a completely different process, if you will. And probably here, if you have a high to low transfer, you'll try to delete what was spilled. But if you do it in a classified environment, they will zeroize all affected components, and they will validate independently that the zeroization has happened. So it's a bigger pain. And it can be very expensive, especially if you hit a lot of systems with that spillage. Yep, it's about containment and zero out. Yep. All right. So ongoing authorization, I get always asked the question, well, Waylon, how long should I set my ATD for? My authorization termination date? It's actually up to you. It's up to the AO. You can set it now for 6 months. So, for example, I'll give you some best practices. If you have high systems, the best practices, the ATD is every 6 months. The reason is you're saying it's absolutely critical. You're going through, the changes are happening too rapidly. The requirements are so high that you're really, if you follow a high system and, with the controls, you've got to have everything automated. They've always got to be tested. So those are usually run 6 months. I've seen them up to 3 years, but we had a recent high system. They let go for 3 years, and all of our data ended up on the internet. So anyways, that's just an example. You probably know about that spillage. That was a huge one. So there is, the best practices for organizations, those are usually run 6 months. For moderate systems, 1 to 5 years. And then for Lowe's, you know, once they're under continuous monitoring, it just depends on the AO. A lot of AOs still use the 3-year timelines, and they still use the 1-year kind of, you know, every year we're going to do annual testing as part of the continuous monitoring. That's fine, but that is not necessarily how you do this new 6-step process in accordance with 137. It's just, we've always done that. We call it continuous monitoring. So if something works, you know, do it, right? And then agencies must report security state, and this is the test question of their IS results to ongoing authorization through Cyberscope. So, ongoing authorization, continuous monitoring program strength should establish methods to monitor. If I've done my NIST special publication 839, what, and this is going to be on your test, but it's good to know, which NIST special publication covers security metrics? 55, NIST special publication 855. They also, all these variables you see here will be in 855. Increase frequency of monitor, assess continuous to determine security controls effectiveness, analyze security-related information, address results, report the IS status managers in accordance with the 800-137. So it will actually have, a lot of times when people go and start creating security metrics based on, you know, cybersecurity strategies and roadmaps, you're supposed to use 855 to capture those initiatives and report on them. And a lot of times people ask, well, what's the best ones to use? Well, whatever the priorities of your roadmap, and you'll put those in these format. Critical updates. Results of the continuous monitoring should be regularly reported to the authorizing officials and agency information security officers. Includes automated support tools, like I told you before. When we get to the end of CDM, when we get to the end of it, and we have, they're going to release organizations, they're going to make you pay for your tools by yourself pretty soon because DHS is going to pick it up. But once we have the suite of tools for our Caesars architecture, for all of the components, all the surface areas, all the checks, that's going to feed into a dashboard, right? And it sounds like your dashboard most likely will be Archer. So that's going to allow, both from a risk perspective, an ANA perspective, and any type of inputs that we brought into our environment for the AOs and the security officers to be updated on an ongoing basis. And that's where they're going to conduct the continuous monitoring. And most recent documentation, any risk, any threat data that changes. Here's a sample automated reporting tool. So you guys use Nessus. This is just Security Center. Some organizations use their dashboarding Security Center. They put all their stuff in. System, last but not least, but something that everyone seems to forget, and then they get beat up on the GAO audits and the IG audits, is they've got all these systems and they never take them out of Cyberscope and they never take them out of Archer, and they wonder why they get beat up that the documentation hasn't been updated in 6 to 8 years. So if you learn nothing other than the system removal process here for me, is that once you validate, NASA has a process for media protections and standardization. They also have the requirements for retention. Once you went through and looked at those variables and how they affect your system removal and decommission, you will upload that document that says you followed all the process, where the data is, all that type of stuff, and then you'll actually decommission that number, so it's not held against you. Security status should reflect the new status. User and application owners hosted on the decommissioned IS should be notified as appropriate. Any security control inheritance relationship should be reviewed and asserted for impact. All right. I think I got a question here online. Lag. You're still getting lag. Okay. Yeah, like, even though it's Wednesday, it's our Friday here, so we're having some internet issues.